Hi, I'm Jackson Crawford, and I'm back here at the reconstructed longhouse at Eiríksstaðir. And we're going to talk a little bit about the experimental archaeology that underlies this place, a little bit of the story behind Eiríksstaðir itself, and also how it came to be reconstructed here. So, Bevan, Heather, or William, how would you like to start that story?
Well, to begin with, Eiríksstaðir reconstruction is a large experimental archaeology project from the beginning. So it's everything done exactly the way it was in the 10th century, and it's an ongoing experiment really, because all of the house, the house and the equipment here is being worn by people who walk by or visit, and also we are trying to live here, as we can say, and so from the beginning this is a completely valid experimental archaeology project.
So, just a little more context for people who are unfamiliar with the place. It is the reconstructed Viking Age longhouse of Eiríksstaðir. The reconstructed house here, is based on the archaeological ruins that are just a short distance away. And so the architects who designed this did it based on their best guess as what it might be. So even from the very start, it was a project in experimental archaeology. Because what archaeologists will tell you is we know a lot about the ground of around a Viking Age longhouse, but the farther up you go, the less we know about it because so little of that survives. Mostly what we have is stones, foundation stones, post holes, and toppled bits of turf, as well as the artifacts from the people living here. So there's much that's unknown, and a lot of what's around us is speculative. So I'm sure there's lots of opportunities to improve this as archaeology improves, as we get to know more and more.
Absolutely. And for example, all of the wood that is in a house like this does not survive 1,000 years in the ground.
No.
So we are seeing the wear and tear also of the wood construction in the house, and it is amazing how well it survives. I mean, now the house is 24 years old, and there's almost no deterioration of the woods already.
Yeah.
And Atli and Rain, you also are involved here at Eiríksstaðir, deeply involved. One thing I'm interested in is when you're showing people around, when you're giving them an orientation to this place, what do you like to emphasize about it?
So for me, it's all about showing people that while the sagas might be full of violence and draugar, the actual everyday life was very different. It's just mundane things don't get put into the exciting narratives that they are telling each other. So it's through piecing together little bits of information, so tidbits from the sagas, accounts from foreign writers like the Christians in Europe and the traders in Byzantium, that we can piece together a rough idea of what it was like and then bring it all together using experimental archaeology. Yeah. But what's fantastic is that you can present that to the people here in the same way that the sagas would have been passed on in the actual Viking Age.
Yeah, and that's a very important point, because when you're reading the sagas, technically that's not how they were delivered through the ages until finally they're written down. So there's a lot of the telephone game going on occasionally, and maybe the ends of the sagas, that's when people are falling asleep. So they don't remember the ending of the saga as well as they remember the beginning, all these little things that make the sagas not a complete source that we can always trust. So you really have to piece everything together bit by bit, like Rain was saying.
And what makes this house really nice is we often think at Herstwick, we often think that what we're trying to do is create an experience when we're trying to research Vikings. And the analogy that we love to give is, suppose there were no more roses in the world, but you wanted to know what a rose smelled like. You could read old books about what it smelled like. You could look at pictures of what it smelled like. You might dig up old roses from the ground, what remains. But the only way to know what a rose smells like is to experience it. And that's what experimental archaeology allows us to do. We can experience it. And through our experiments, the general public can also be a part of that experience. And this is the perfect place for someone interested in the Viking Age to experience daily, mundane Viking Age life. So it's a unique resource.
I would say that it's not just people who are interested in the Viking Age. One of the things that I really love about being a guide here is seeing people who walk in with a glazed expression, ticking a list off of things they wanted to do in Iceland, and then having them come to life as I'm presenting it in a living, experienceable way.
Yeah.
And at the end, they've stayed for 2 tours, and they're asking me about what academic books they should be buying when they get home, because for the first time, history has been presented to them in a way that they feel they can connect to and get excited about.
Yeah, and this is one of the places where things aren't locked behind a glass case in a museum. We actually hand out the replicas to guests who come out to Eiríksstaðir, so you can actually not just not
exactly.
just see it, but you can hold it, you can smell it, you can feel it in your hands, you can see how they fit.
And sometimes seeing how it's made. So
Yeah.
sometimes we have dye pots going on the fire so that you can see how the wool was coloured right before your eyes.
Yeah.
In fact, you do right now.
Yeah,
Yes.
there's a hand with some sorrel in it, it seems. But also, exactly the smell, the surfaces, but also the hypnotizing fire. That's something that the modern person doesn't realize. What's the properties of the fire. Getting in touch with yourself, being calm. I mean, we've very often had people here who were in a hurry when they came into the door, but they spent hours here because it was so lovely by the fire.
Yes.
And I think it's really deep down in the human soul, this calming effects of the fire.
I think it also really plays into how the sagas would have been presented. Because if you've read the sagas, they generally begin with a lengthy rundown of genealogy, and when you're reading that, you just, okay, I'm skipping this. But then if you've heard somebody who's a talented storyteller, and combining it with this environment like this, with the fire and the atmospheric lighting, and it is enthralling just listening to them go through that genealogy. It's almost a ritualized beginning to the saga. So it's a totally different experience that is so much more engaging when you have it in its original context.
Yeah.
If you think of it as a trailer that lets you clear your mind to get ready for what's coming. I think sometimes you see that in the poetry too, the bits, the repetitive parts, something like Geir Garmur Mjög, that whole stanza that comes up again and again in Vospal. It gives you time to absorb what you've just heard. And speaking of which, I had the privilege the last 2 days of speaking in here for an hour or two, reading here by the fire. And I mean, for the speaker too, there's something kind of entrancing about it. You get into a mode.
Yes, that's true. And it's, in the end, and especially when you're here during the winter time with guests, you realize that the sagas or old poetry is really a life-saving element, because living together in tight spaces like this, all of these people, they needed something to unite them and to connect them, and of course also to entertain them, to just to survive each other for so many months of harsh winters.
And that's one thing that this place does, is show how tight the quarters were, how little privacy there was.
Yes, exactly, that's true.
Yeah, when you get a full house like Jackson did, you really get that sense of everybody in here being really crammed up, but still everybody's enthralled. You stop minding how tightly you sit next to everybody else, because you just start getting so involved in the storytelling. That's
true. The physical environment does make you appreciate that exact thing. It gives you Gives you an excuse to not think about the fact that you're sitting in your bed and
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
6 other people. Maybe.
Yes.
You can definitely see why they had pack-up tables that they'd store up in the rafters.
Yeah.
Definitely not a kind of environment where you want to have permanent furniture.
No.
No, exactly. But this element of experimental archaeology from the beginning at Eiríksstaðir is probably the reason why William fell in love with this place
Mhm.
and approached us some 5 years ago for making experiments with iron,
Yeah.
making iron. And it's absolutely opened my mind to how limited our history knowledge is. We are just looking at artifacts. We're not really trying to understand how people behaved, how things were done, what is true and what is not true, and just a really small experiment that was made here a few years ago, just measuring how much firewood we need for a house like this, tells us that we don't know anything about the daily lives. You probably have to behave totally different around a big fire in a house like that than we do today. We have to have airlocks, for example, to have the airflow. So there are so many like pit holes you can fall into and
Yes.
start researching, and I think that's absolutely amazing.
But also these challenges in reconstructing daily life are completely understandable. I mean, in a sense, I'm sort of a modern professional storyteller. I don't spend time talking about my electric bill and my frickin' flood insurance, right? That doesn't, like, which I could, but like, that doesn't interest people. That's not a story that gets people involved. So if someone wanted to reconstruct my life, they'd have to do that from whatever little bits and pieces were left of, my bills and threatening letters to insurance agencies and from.
And probably we would get a very strange picture of
Yes.
your life.
Yes.
Mhm.
It'll
Yeah,
be
they would.
distorted.
Yeah.
It would be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you would miss many essential parts.
Yeah.
Right, they would miss the things that actually keep someone up at night in some ways, right?
Yeah.
But those aren't necessarily the things that are narratively interesting.
No.
They don't necessarily. It's not what you would write about in someone's, Wikipedia article or saga,
Yeah.
right?
No.
We don't hear about Finnbogi Rami and his, the boil that he had on his, arm one day or something.
Especially if that's something that you were talking about to a contemporary audience. Can you imagine how much of a bore you would be if you gathered your family to come and listen to you read out your bills?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, that's
Although-
right. Yeah. Although, well, you can, you can do something with it, but probably, not for a very long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And definitely not for a millennium.
So I'd like to add just one more thing to what you said. When Herstwick started researching Viking Age iron smelting in Iceland, we wanted to use experimental archaeology to figure it out, to research it. And we were looking for a place in Iceland where we could do that work, and what better place to do it than basically the center of experimental archaeology. This whole house that we're sitting in is based on experimental archaeology. So when we were given the opportunity, the invitation to do our research here, we just jumped at the opportunity. It seemed like a perfect match.
Yeah. And everybody around me considered this absolutely crazy and absolutely insignificant also. It's not a real research, but then again, when they saw the results, they realized this. And I think the exhibition at the National Museum really exhibits how important this experiment was.
Yeah. And it's only growing. I mean, the exhibit of our iron work at the National Museum sort of validates this research. And we're on to the next step. Now we're studying the Viking Age battle tactic of burning down a longhouse, and we're doing it with experimental archaeology by building houses, instrumenting them, burning them down, analyzing the results.
Yeah,
So it's going to be even more exciting, and who knows what comes next.
yeah, I'm curious. And I'm looking forward to hear some ideas.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to that too.
Yeah.
Well, for now, from Eiríksstaðir in beautiful Iceland, we're wishing you all the best.